In a galaxy where humans are considered the weakest species, where dragonkin tower over settlements with scales that could deflect plasma cannons and breath that could melt starship hulls, Dr. Marcus Chun never expected to find himself in the most unlikely conversation of his life. When a massive shadow fell across his research station on the remote mining planet of Kepler, 442b, he thought it was another inspection from the Draconic Empire. When those golden eyes peered through his laboratory window, and that melodious voice spoke words that would change everything, he realized that sometimes the most powerful beings in the universe share the same loneliness as the smallest. What happens when a brilliant but shy human xenobiologist becomes the confidant of a dragon woman who rules systems but can't find someone to simply talk to? What happens when two vastly different beings discover that connection transcends species, size, and the very laws that govern their worlds? This is their story. This is how humanity proved that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in our weapons or our technology, but in our capacity to understand, to listen, and to love without limits. Dr. Marcus Chun adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses for the third time in 10 minutes as he hunched over his portable microscope. The red soil of Kepler, 442b, stretched endlessly beyond the transparent walls of his research dome, broken only by the occasional metallic glint of mining equipment in the distance. 3 months into his xenobiology assignment on this remote planet, and he still felt like an intruder in this alien landscape. The communication device on his workbench crackled to life. "Chun, this is Base Command. We're detecting a large atmospheric disturbance heading your way. Probably just another dust storm, but protocol says we need to warn you." Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his lab coat sleeve. The environmental controls in his dome had been acting up for weeks, and the replacement parts wouldn't arrive for another 2 months. "Acknowledged, Base Command. Should I secure the equipment?" "Negative. Storm should pass over you. Just stay inside until it clears." The comm went silent, leaving Marcus alone with the quiet hum of his instruments and the distant rumble of atmospheric processors. He returned to his work, cataloging the microscopic life forms he'd discovered in the planet's subsurface water deposits. These tiny organisms could revolutionize terraforming efforts across the galaxy, but explaining their importance to the mining consortium that funded his research was like trying to teach quantum physics to a rock. A shadow passed over his dome. Marcus looked up from his microscope, expecting to see the familiar bulk of a cargo transport, or perhaps an early glimpse of the approaching storm clouds. Instead, he found himself staring at something that made his breath catch in his throat. Wings. Massive, membranous wings that stretched at least 50 meters from tip to tip, blocking out the pale orange sun of Kepler, 442b's primary star. The wings were a deep emerald green, with veins of gold running through them like living circuitry. As Marcus watched, frozen in place, the wings folded gracefully, and their owner descended toward his research station with impossible grace for something so enormous. The landing sent vibrations through the ground that rattled every piece of equipment in Marcus's dome. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he found himself face to face with a dragon. Not the mechanical constructs he'd seen in military footage or the feral beasts that sometimes attacked mining operations on frontier worlds. This was something else entirely. Something that regarded him with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species. Her scales caught the light and reflected it in patterns that hypnotized him. Her snout was elegantly tapered, and when she tilted her massive head to study him, Marcus noticed the intricate patterns etched into her scales around her eyes, like living tattoos that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The dragon moved closer to his dome, lowering her head until her enormous eye was level with Marcus's workstation. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the dome's communication system, melodious despite its power. "You are Dr. Marcus Chun, the xenobiologist." It wasn't a question. Marcus's hands trembled as he activated his communication array. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. "Ah, yes, that's me. How do you know my name?" "Your research papers on extremophile organisms have been distributed throughout the Draconic Empire's scientific networks. Your work on Titan VII's sulfur-based ecosystems was particularly illuminating." Marcus blinked rapidly behind his glasses. The Draconic Empire had been reading his research? The same research that his human colleagues often dismissed as too theoretical. You've read my papers? All of them. The dragon's voice carried something that almost sounded like amusement. I am Thessarian Veltar Nox, primary scientific advisor to the Empire's terraforming collective. I have been following your work for some time. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thessarian Veltar Nox was legendary throughout the galaxy. Her research had unlocked the secrets of atmospheric engineering that allowed the Empire to terraform dead worlds in decades rather than centuries. She had personally overseen the transformation of 17 star systems. Her theoretical frameworks on bioatmospheric integration were considered masterpieces of scientific literature. And she was sitting outside his tiny research dome, talking to him like they were colleagues. Marcus found his voice, though it still shook. Thessarian. Primary advisor Nox. What brings you to Kepler? 442b. This is hardly important enough to warrant your personal attention. Those golden eyes seemed to study him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its formal tone. May I ask you something, Dr. Chun? Something of a personal nature. The question caught Marcus completely off guard. Personal questions from dragon nobility weren't exactly covered in xenobiology training. Of course, though I can't imagine what a human might know that would interest someone of your stature. When did you last have a meaningful conversation with another sentient being? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus opened his mouth to respond with something about his regular communications with Base Command, but the words died in his throat. When had he last talked to someone about anything other than work, supply schedules, or technical difficulties? When had anyone asked him how he was feeling, or what he thought about something that wasn't related to his research? Marcus trailed off, the realization hitting him harder than he expected. It's been a while. Thessarian's massive head tilted slightly, and Marcus caught something in those golden eyes that looked almost vulnerable. 3 months, 2 weeks, and for days, to be precise. That was when you last spoke to your colleague, Dr. Sarah Martinez, via long-range communication about her concerns regarding your isolation. Before that, it had been 6 months since you engaged in any conversation that lasted more than 20 minutes and covered topics beyond your immediate professional duties. Marcus stared at her in shock. You've been monitoring my communications? Not monitoring. Analyzing patterns of social isolation among researchers in remote assignments. It's part of my current research into the psychological factors that affect long-term terraforming projects. Thessarian's voice grew quieter. I find myself in a unique position to understand the challenges of extended isolation. Something in her tone made Marcus look more carefully at this magnificent being outside his dome. Despite her obvious power and authority, despite scales that could probably deflect most weapons known to science, despite her position as one of the Empire's most respected figures, there was something in her posture that seemed lonely. You're isolated too, Marcus said, surprising himself with his boldness. But how is that possible? You're surrounded by the Empire's finest minds. You have colleagues across dozens of star systems. Colleagues, yes. Subordinates who hang on my every word because my research determines the fate of their worlds. Scientists who treat me with such reverence that they forget I am a person beneath the scales and titles. Thessarian's golden eyes met his. When did you last have someone speak to you as simply Marcus rather than Dr. Chun, the xenobiologist? The question hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. Even his few remaining friends from university addressed him formally now, treating him like his degrees, and research had somehow transformed him into someone different from the awkward graduate student they used to share pizza with. It's been a long time, Marcus admitted quietly. For me as well. When you reach my position in dragon society, others expect you to be above such mundane concerns as companionship or casual conversation. They assume that achievement and recognition are sufficient substitutes for genuine connection. Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn in despite the surreal nature of the conversation. Is that why you came here? For a conversation? Thessarian was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus wondered if he had overstepped some boundary. Then she spoke, and her voice carried a weight of honesty that surprised him. I came here because your isolation patterns match my own. Because your research shows a mind that finds wonder in the smallest forms of life. And I thought perhaps someone who could appreciate the complexity of microscopic organisms might be willing to see beyond the obvious when looking at a dragon. The vulnerability in her admission made Marcus's chest tighten. Here was one of the most powerful beings in known space, capable of reshaping entire worlds, confessing to loneliness with the same awkward honesty that Marcus himself struggled with in social situations. "I'd like that," Marcus said simply. "To see beyond the obvious, I mean. Though I have to admit, you're rather impressively obvious. I mean, you're enormous and magnificent and probably capable of melting my entire research station with a sneeze." To his amazement, Thessarian laughed. The sound was like distant thunder mixed with wind chimes, beautiful and powerful. "I promise not to sneeze on your equipment. And, for what it's worth, you're the first person in several decades to call me magnificent rather than intimidating." "Well, you are intimidating," Marcus said, his natural honesty overriding his social anxiety. "But intimidating and magnificent aren't mutually exclusive. Like a supernova, or a black hole, or..." He trailed off, realizing he was babbling. "Or a dragon having an unexpectedly personal conversation with a human xenobiologist on a remote mining world," Thessarian finished, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. They fell into a comfortable silence, dragon and humans studying each other across the barrier of the dome's walls. Marcus realized that for the first time in months, he didn't feel the familiar weight of isolation pressing down on his shoulders. There was something profoundly reassuring about sitting in the presence of someone who understood what it meant to be brilliant and accomplished and utterly alone. "Thessarian," Marcus said, carefully testing the name. "May I ask you something now?" "Of course. Why haven't you been with anyone in months? I mean, forgive me if that's too personal, but surely someone in your position would have opportunities for companionship." The question seemed to surprise her. Those massive golden eyes blinked slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried centuries of weariness. "Because when you are what I am, Dr. Chun, when you are a dragon of the noble houses, when your decisions affect the fate of star systems, when your very presence can alter the political landscape of entire sectors, people do not see you as someone to be with. They see you as someone to be impressed by, to gain favor from, to use as a stepping stone to advancement." Marcus felt his heart clench at the pain in her voice. "That must be incredibly lonely." "It is. I haven't had anyone simply want to spend time with me, to talk with me, without agenda or expectation, in longer than I care to calculate. I haven't had anyone look at me and see Thessarian rather than primary scientific advisor knocks in." She paused, and Marcus could see her massive shoulders shift in what might have been a shrug. "In months. Many months." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Marcus found himself thinking about his own isolation, his own struggles with connecting to others who saw only his academic achievements rather than the person behind them. But his loneliness was nothing compared to what she described. "I see Thessarian," Marcus said quietly. "I mean, I'm terrified of you, obviously, but I see a person who cares enough about the psychological well-being of researchers to personally investigate isolation patterns. I see someone who took time out of what must be an impossibly busy schedule to have a conversation with a lonely xenobiologist. I see someone who values genuine connection enough to be vulnerable with a stranger." Thessarian was very still for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "Thank you, Marcus. You cannot know how much that means to me." The use of his first name sent a warm feeling through Marcus's chest. He realized that this conversation, impossible as it was, felt more real and meaningful than any interaction he'd had in months. "Would you?" Marcus hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you like to stay for a while? I mean, I know you must have important things to do, but if you have time, I could show you my research. Not because I think it will impress you, but because I'd like to share it with someone who might understand why I find it fascinating." Thessarian's massive head lifted slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been hope in those golden eyes. "I would like that very much, Marcus. I would like that more than you know." Marcus spent the next hour setting up his portable holographic display system outside his dome, his hands shaking with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Thessarian had settled herself into a comfortable position nearby, her massive form creating a windbreak that actually made the outdoor environment more pleasant than it had been in weeks. Occasionally, She would ask a technical question about his equipment or offer observations about the planet's atmospheric conditions that revealed depths of knowledge Marcus could barely comprehend. The mineral composition of the soil here suggests that this world underwent significant volcanic activity within the last 10,000 years, Thessarian observed, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. The atmosphere processors are actually working against the planet's natural tendency toward a sulfur-rich environment. Marcus paused in his equipment setup, looking at her with new appreciation. That's exactly right. The mining consortium's atmospheric reports completely missed that. They're treating this like a standard terrestrial conversion project, but the subsurface geology is all wrong for their approach. I noticed the discrepancy in their filed environmental impact statements. The sulfur cycle they've established will collapse within 15 years, possibly sooner, if they continue their current extraction patterns. Thessarian's voice carried a note of professional frustration. I submitted a correction to their terraforming board 3 months ago. It was ignored, because humans don't trust dragon science, Marcus said bitterly, finally, voicing something that had been bothering him since he arrived. They think your people are trying to sabotage human expansion efforts, whereas in reality, we simply prefer not to see worlds die due to preventable ignorance. Thessarian's tone was dry. Your species has remarkable potential, Marcus, but your political leadership sometimes lacks the patience required for proper scientific methodology. Marcus activated his holographic display, and a three-dimensional image of microscopic organisms bloomed in the air between them. Each tiny creature was rendered in exquisite detail, their cellular structures visible in brilliant blues and greens against the reddish backdrop of the alien landscape. These are what I've been studying, Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into his area of expertise. They're unlike anything we've ever discovered. They don't just survive in high-sulfur environments. They actually require sulfur compounds to reproduce. But the fascinating part is how they process other elements. Thessarian leaned closer, her massive head lowering until her golden eyes were just meters from the holographic display. Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her scales, could hear the subtle whistle of air moving through her nostrils as she studied his work. "Show me their metabolic pathways," she said, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice rather than the polite interest Marcus usually encountered when presenting his research. Marcus manipulated the display, zooming in to show the intricate chemical processes occurring within each microscopic cell. This is where it gets interesting. They're not just processing sulfur for energy. Look at this pathway here. He highlighted a specific cellular structure. They're actually converting trace heavy metals into stable compounds that enhance their reproduction rate. Remarkable. Thessarian's voice carried a note of excitement that made Marcus's pulse quicken. They're natural bioremediators. These organisms could potentially clean contaminated soils while simultaneously establishing the foundation for a stable ecosystem. Exactly. Marcus's enthusiasm bubbled over, and for a moment he forgot he was talking to one of the galaxy's most powerful beings. The mining consortium sees this world as a resource extraction site, but with these organisms, it could become a model for sustainable terraforming. We could have thriving ecosystems instead of dead agricultural zones. Marcus realized he was gesturing animatedly at the display, his usual social awkwardness forgotten in the excitement of sharing his discovery with someone who truly understood its implications. When he glanced at Thessarian, he found her watching him with an expression that seemed almost fond. "You have a gift, Marcus," she said quietly. "Not just for the science, though your methodology is exemplary. You have a gift for seeing life where others see only resources. That is rare." The compliment made Marcus flush with warmth. It doesn't seem very useful most of the time. The consortium administrators think I'm wasting their money studying space bacteria when I should be focused on soil composition reports. The consortium administrators are fools. The flat certainty in Thessarian's voice made Marcus blink in surprise. Your space bacteria could revolutionize how we approach planetary rehabilitation. The applications for worlds damaged by industrial exploitation are enormous. You really think so? Marcus found himself asking, and realized how much he needed to hear an affirmative answer from someone whose opinion he could trust. "I know so. I have personally overseen the terraforming of 17 worlds," Marcus, I have seen what happens when we focus solely on immediate resource extraction versus when we take time to understand and work with existing ecological foundations. Your organisms represent the difference between a world that thrives for millennia and one that becomes uninhabitable within decades. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for months. To have his work validated by someone of Thessarian stature was beyond anything he had dared hope for. "Thank you," he said simply. "I've been starting to doubt whether any of this mattered." "It matters more than you know." Thessarian was quiet for a moment, then asked, "May I share something with you? Something about my own work that I haven't been able to discuss with anyone." The request surprised Marcus. "Of course, though I can't imagine what insights a xenobiologist could offer someone with your expertise. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected perspectives." Thessarian's golden eyes fixed on the holographic display, but Marcus sensed she was seeing something beyond his microscopic organisms. "For the past several years, I have been developing a theoretical framework for what I call empathetic terraforming. Instead of imposing our vision of what a world should become, we learn to understand what it wants to become and guide that process." Marcus felt his breath catch. The concept was elegant in its simplicity and revolutionary in its implications. That's brilliant, but I imagine it's not popular with the expansion-focused factions." "It is not. The Empire's Terraforming Council considers it too slow, too uncertain. They prefer the current approach of atmospheric bombardment and ecosystem replacement. Faster results, more predictable outcomes." Thessarian's voice carried a note of frustration. "They do not understand that faster is not always better when dealing with complex biological systems. Have you had any opportunities to test your theories?" "Limited ones. I have been able to implement small-scale projects on 3 worlds with remarkable success. Ecosystems that achieve stability in decades rather than centuries, with biodiversity indices far exceeding standard terraforming results." Thessarian paused, and Marcus heard something almost vulnerable in her voice when she continued. "But I haven't had anyone share the excitement of those discoveries with. The Council sees only efficiency metrics and resource allocation reports." Marcus found himself leaning forward, caught up in the passion he heard in her voice. "Could you show me? I mean, would it be possible for me to see your data? I know I don't have your expertise in large-scale atmospheric engineering, but the biological integration aspects. You want to see my research?" Thessarian sounded genuinely surprised. "Are you joking? This could change everything about how we approach planetary development. The potential applications for biological rehabilitation, for working with existing ecosystems instead of destroying them." Marcus trailed off, realizing he was getting carried away again. "Sorry, I tend to get excited about research that could actually help preserve life instead of just cataloging it." "Do not apologize for passion, Marcus. It is a precious quality." Thessarian was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "I have a research vessel in orbit. If you would be willing, I could show you some of my field data from the Kepler 378 system. The biological integration results there have been particularly promising." Marcus's mind reeled at the invitation. A chance to see cutting-edge terraforming research, to collaborate with one of the galaxy's finest scientific minds, to actually contribute to work that could benefit countless worlds. It was beyond anything he had imagined possible when he accepted this isolated assignment. "I would be honored," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But are you certain? I mean, wouldn't there be political implications? A dragon scientific advisor collaborating with a human researcher?" "Undoubtedly." Thessarian's voice carried a note of amusement. "But I find myself caring less about political implications than I have in decades. Perhaps it is time for the Empire to remember that science advances through collaboration, not isolation." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Taking such a stand could have serious consequences for someone in her position, yet she was willing to risk it for the sake of scientific progress. "There's something else," Thessarian said, her voice becoming more hesitant. "Something beyond the professional collaboration I should mention." "What is it?" "I find myself hoping that our conversations might continue beyond the immediate scope of research collaboration. I have not experienced such genuine intellectual connection in a very long time." The possibility of regular discourse with someone who sees scientific wonder rather than political opportunity when they look at me is... She paused, searching for words. It is something I had begun to believe was no longer possible. The admission sent warmth spreading through Marcus's chest. The idea that someone of Thessarian's accomplishments could value his perspective, could actually enjoy talking with him, seemed almost too good to be true. I'd like that too, Marcus said honestly. More than I know how to express. I haven't felt this energized about my work, about anything really in months. Having someone who understands not just the science, but the passion behind it. It makes the isolation bearable, Thessarian finished. More than bearable. It makes me remember why I became a scientist in the first place. They fell into a comfortable silence, both contemplating the unexpected connection that had formed between them. The alien sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the red landscape, and painting Thessarian scales in shades of gold and bronze that took Marcus's breath away. Thessarian, Marcus said carefully, can I ask you something personal? Haven't you been asking me personal things all afternoon? Her voice carried gentle amusement. This is different, more personal. Marcus took a breath, gathering courage. When you said you haven't been with anyone in months, did you mean romantically? Or with just anyone at all? The question seemed to surprise her. Those massive golden eyes blinked slowly as she considered her answer. Both, I suppose. Dragon society has very specific expectations about relationships, particularly for those in positions of authority. Romantic attachments are expected to serve political or genetic optimization purposes. The concept of choosing companionship based on genuine affection or intellectual compatibility is considered frivolous. Marcus felt his heart clench at the loneliness implicit in her words. That sounds horrible. It is what I have always known. Until today, I had not fully realized how much I was missing. Thessarian turned her golden gaze to him. What about you, Marcus? I imagine human society offers more freedom in such matters. Marcus laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. In theory, yes. In practice, when you're an awkward scientist more interested in microscopic organisms than social gatherings, the opportunities are somewhat limited. My last relationship ended 2 years ago when she decided she needed someone who could talk about something other than extremophile bacteria at dinner parties. Her loss, Thessarian said firmly, and the conviction in her voice made Marcus flush with unexpected pleasure. I'm not sure about that. I'm not exactly what most people would consider ideal companion material. Most people do not understand the value of passionate curiosity about the universe. Most people do not recognize the beauty in finding wonder in the smallest forms of life. Thessarian's voice grew thoughtful. Perhaps most people are not worth the effort of impressing them. Marcus stared at her, struck by the simple wisdom of her words. You might be right about that. I usually am, Thessarian said with what sounded like a smile. It is one of the burdens of being me. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. Humble too. Humility is overrated. I prefer accuracy. The easy banter between them felt natural in a way that Marcus hadn't experienced in years. There was no pressure to be anyone other than himself, no need to pretend to be more socially adept or less obsessed with his work. Thessarian seemed to appreciate him exactly as he was, awkwardness and all. As the alien stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus realized that his life had fundamentally changed in the course of a single afternoon. Not just because of the research opportunities Thessarian had offered, though those were extraordinary, but because for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel alone. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For seeing me. For talking with me instead of at me. For making me remember that science is supposed to be joyful. Marcus paused, then added with characteristic honesty, and for being lonely enough to risk visiting an isolated human researcher. I know that probably sounds selfish, but I'm grateful for whatever brought you here. It does not sound selfish, Marcus. It sounds honest. And honesty is perhaps the rarest gift one can receive. Thessarian was quiet for a moment, then said, I should probably return to my ship soon. But before I go, would you be willing to continue this conversation tomorrow? I find myself reluctant to let our discourse end just yet. Marcus felt his heart leap. I like that more than anything. Then I will return tomorrow, and we can discuss the logistics of examining my research data together. Thessarian paused, then added with something that might have been shyness, and perhaps we can simply talk more as well. I find I have greatly enjoyed our conversation. Me too, Marcus said, smiling widely. Me too. Marcus woke before dawn for the first time in months, his mind already racing with anticipation of Thessarian's promised return. He found himself cleaning his research station with unusual care, organizing his equipment, and even attempting to make his living quarters presentable. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was essentially tidying up for a being who could probably see through the walls of his dome with her enhanced dragon senses. When a familiar shadow passed overhead just after sunrise, Marcus's heart jumped in a way that had nothing to do with fear this time. He stepped outside to greet Thessarian as she landed, marveling again at the graceful way someone so massive could move through the air. "Good morning, Marcus," Thessarian said, settling herself into the same position she had occupied the day before. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Marcus admitted, then felt himself flush at how that might sound. "I mean, I was excited about the research possibilities we discussed." Of course. There was something that might have been amusement in Thessarian's voice. "I brought something I thought you might find interesting." A panel slid open on what Marcus had assumed was decorative armor plating along Thessarian's side, revealing sophisticated technology integrated seamlessly into her biological structure. She withdrew a crystalline data storage device that glowed with soft blue light. "This contains the complete biological survey data from the Kepler 378 terraforming project," Thessarian explained, including some rather remarkable discoveries about symbiotic relationships between introduced atmosphere processors and indigenous microbial life. Marcus accepted the crystal with hands that trembled slightly. The data it contained probably represented years of work by some of the galaxy's most advanced scientific minds. "This is incredible. Thank you for trusting me with it." "The trust is not unearned, Marcus. Your analysis yesterday of the metabolic pathways in your sulfur-processing organisms showed insights that my own xenobiology specialist missed." Thessarian's golden eyes fixed on him. "I am curious to see what you make of the atmospheric integration data." Marcus loaded the crystal into his analysis system, and immediately the air around them filled with holographic displays showing a bewildering array of atmospheric readings, biological surveys, and three-dimensional ecosystem models. Even at first glance, Marcus could see that the scope of the work was staggering. "This is beautiful," Marcus breathed, manipulating the displays to examine different aspects of the data. The level of detail, the integration between biological and atmospheric systems. How long did this project take? 3 years of active terraforming, preceded by 2 years of intensive ecosystem analysis. Thessarian moved closer to the displays, her presence warming the air around Marcus. "What you are seeing is the first successful implementation of empathetic terraforming principles on a planetary scale." Marcus lost himself in the data, his excitement building as he began to understand the implications of what Thessarian had accomplished. The traditional approach to terraforming involved essentially sterilizing a world and rebuilding its ecosystem from scratch. What Thessarian had done instead was to identify the underlying patterns of the planet's existing biological systems and guide them toward stability rather than replacing them entirely. "The carbon fixation rates here are extraordinary," Marcus said, highlighting a particular data set. "Your atmosphere processors aren't just converting the atmosphere. They're working in conjunction with indigenous plant life to create a feedback loop that accelerates the entire process." "Precisely. And if you examine the biodiversity indices over time," Thessarian manipulated the display with delicate movements of her massive claws, revealing trend lines that made Marcus's eyes widen. "The ecosystem is becoming more diverse, not less. That should be impossible with standard terraforming." Marcus stared at the data in amazement. "How did you manage to avoid the typical biodiversity collapse that occurs during atmospheric conversion?" "By listening to what the planet was trying to tell us. Every world has inherent biological patterns, evolved relationships between organisms that have developed over millions of years. Instead of destroying those relationships, we learn to support and guide them." Marcus spent the next several hours immersed in the data, occasionally calling Thessarian's attention to particular findings or asking technical questions about her methodologies. What emerged was a picture of terraforming as an art form rather than an engineering project, requiring intuition and empathy alongside technical expertise. This changes everything, Marcus said finally, sitting back from the displays with his mind reeling. If these techniques could be applied more broadly, they could revolutionize how we approach planetary development, Thessarian agreed. But implementation requires a level of patience and biological sensitivity that most terraforming organizations consider impractical. Impractical because it takes longer. Impractical because it requires accepting that we do not always know better than billions of years of evolutionary development. It requires humility, which is not a quality that imperial expansion projects typically value. Marcus heard the frustration in her voice and looked up from the data displays to study her expression. You've been fighting for this approach for a long time, haven't you? Decades. I have published papers, presented evidence, demonstrated successful outcomes. But change comes slowly to institutions built on the assumption that power equals wisdom. Thessarian's golden eyes met his. It has been a lonely battle. It doesn't have to be, Marcus said quietly. I mean, I know I don't have your authority or influence, but if you're looking for allies in promoting this approach, I will be honored to help however I can. Something shifted in Thessarian's expression, a warmth that had nothing to do with her draconic physiology. You would do that? Even knowing that association with my research could complicate your own career prospects. Marcus thought about his career prospects as they stood now, isolated on a mining world, studying organisms that his superiors considered irrelevant, producing research that disappeared into corporate databases without ever being implemented. Then, he looked at the revolutionary data still glowing around him, representing work that could transform how humans interacted with alien worlds. My career prospects aren't exactly stellar as it stands, Marcus said with a self-deprecating smile. Besides, this is important. This could mean the difference between humans becoming another expansionist empire that leaves dead worlds in its wake, or actually building something sustainable. You understand, Thessarian said softly. You truly understand what this could mean. Understand that you've found a way to work with life instead of against it. I understand that you've proven cooperation can be more effective than conquest. Marcus paused, gathering courage for his next words. And I understand that you've been doing this revolutionary work without anyone to share the excitement with. That's horrible, Thessarian. No one should have to carry something this important alone. The vulnerability that crossed Thessarian's magnificent features made Marcus's heart ache. For a moment, the powerful scientific advisor disappeared, and he saw only someone who had been struggling in isolation with knowledge too important to abandon, but too revolutionary to be easily accepted. I had not realized how much I needed to hear someone else say that, Thessarian admitted. For so long, I have wondered if perhaps I was wrong to resist the conventional approaches. If my concerns about biodiversity and ecosystem stability were simply emotional attachments that had no place in practical terraforming. They're not emotional attachments. They're scientific insights based on solid data and proven results. Marcus's voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. What you've accomplished here proves that empathy and scientific rigor aren't mutually exclusive. They're complementary. Thessarian was quiet for a long moment, studying the data displays that surrounded them. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of decision. Marcus, I want to make you an offer. Not just collaboration on research analysis, but true partnership. I have funding approval for a new terraforming project in the Kepler 442 system. This system, the consortium's current approach, will fail within 2 years, leaving this world uninhabitable. I could requisition your assignment, bring you aboard my research team to develop an alternative approach. Marcus felt his breath catch. The opportunity was beyond anything he had dared imagine. You're serious? Completely serious. Your understanding of extremophile organisms, combined with my atmospheric engineering experience, could develop a comprehensive rehabilitation plan for this world. We could prove that empathetic terraforming works on planets already damaged by conventional industrial extraction. That would be incredible, Marcus said, his mind already racing with possibilities. But wouldn't that put you at odds with the mining consortium? And what about the political implications of a dragon advisor working directly with a human scientist? Let me worry about the political implications. As for the consortium, Thessarian's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if dragons could smile. I suspect they will be very interested in any approach that might salvage their investment in this world rather than writing it off as a loss. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. The chance to work on meaningful research, to contribute to something that could genuinely help preserve life rather than just document it, to collaborate with someone who shared his passion for understanding rather than exploiting biological systems. It was everything he had hoped for when he first became a scientist. There's something else, Thessarian continued, her voice becoming more hesitant. Something beyond the professional collaboration that I should address directly. What is it? Yesterday, you asked about my personal situation, about not being with anyone. I have been thinking about that conversation, and I realized there is something I need to tell you. Marcus felt his heart begin to race, though he wasn't sure whether from anticipation or anxiety. I am listening. In dragon culture, relationships of any significance require mutual respect, intellectual compatibility, and genuine affection. Political arrangements and genetic optimization partnerships exist, but they are not considered true relationships. Thessarian's golden eyes fixed on his. Yesterday, for the first time in decades, I experienced all three of those requirements with another sentient being. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Marcus's mind reel. Thessarian, are you saying? I'm saying that my interest in you extends beyond professional collaboration. Marcus, I am saying that I find myself drawn to your mind, your passion for discovery, your willingness to see wonder in the smallest forms of life. Her voice grew softer. I am saying that for the first time in centuries, I have met someone who makes me remember that there is joy to be found in simple companionship. Marcus stared at her, struggling to process what he was hearing. The most powerful being he had ever met, someone whose intelligence and accomplishments dwarfed his own, was confessing feelings that mirrored his own growing attachment to their conversations. I feel the same way, Marcus said quietly. I never thought someone like you could see anything worthwhile in someone like me. But these conversations have been the best part of my days. You make me feel like my work matters, like I matter, in a way I haven't experienced in years. You do matter, Marcus. More than you know. Thessarian moved closer, lowering her massive head until she was just meters away from him. But I need you to understand what I am suggesting. A relationship between us would be unprecedented. The challenges would be enormous. Physical challenges? Marcus asked, his scientific mind immediately jumping to practical considerations. Physical, social, political. Dragon physiology and human physiology are not directly compatible in traditional terms. And the social implications of such a relationship would create difficulties for both of us. Marcus found himself thinking not about the obstacles, but about how empty his life had felt before Thessarian arrived. How isolated and purposeless he had been, going through the motions of research without anyone to share the excitement of discovery with. The connection between them felt more real and meaningful than anything he had experienced in years. I don't care about the difficulties, Marcus said with a firmness that surprised them both. I care about this. About us talking for hours about science and life and everything else. About having someone who understands why I get excited about microscopic organisms. About not being alone with my thoughts anymore. And I care about having someone see me as Thessarian rather than primary advisor Knox. About intellectual partnership instead of political maneuvering. About conversation that feeds my curiosity rather than serves someone else's agenda. Thessarian's voice grew warm. About not being alone anymore. They looked at each other in silence, both aware that they were standing at a threshold that would change their lives forever. The practical challenges were real and significant, but the connection between them was equally real and far more precious than either had dared hope to find. So, where does that leave us? Marcus asked softly. It leaves us taking things one day at a time, learning about each other, building something neither of us expected, but both of us need. Thessarian's golden eyes held his. If you are willing to try something unprecedented with a dragon who has forgotten how to be anything other than a scientist. I'm willing, Marcus said without hesitation. More than willing. Though I should warn you, I've never been in a relationship with someone who could accidentally incinerate me if they sneezed. I promise to be careful with my sneezing, Thessarian said, and the warm amusement in her voice made Marcus's heart soar. As the alien sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus realized that his life had transformed completely in less than 2 days. Not only had he found professional partnership that could advance both their careers and potentially change how humans approach planetary development, but he had also found something he had stopped believing was possible for him: genuine connection with someone who valued him exactly as he was. The future was full of uncertainties and challenges, but for the first time in years, Marcus was eager to face them rather than simply endure them. Whatever came next, he wouldn't be facing it alone. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the observation deck of Thessarian's research vessel, watching the red surface of Kepler 442b slowly rotate beneath them. The ship itself was a marvel of dragon engineering, with organic curves that seemed to flow like living tissue while housing technology that surpassed anything in the human fleet. More importantly, it had become home in a way that his isolated research dome had never managed to be. The atmospheric readings from Sector 7 are showing significant improvement, Marcus reported, studying the data streaming across the holographic displays around him. The sulfur-processing organisms have established stable colonies throughout the former mining sites. Excellent. And the heavy metal contamination levels? Thessarian's voice carried from the engineering section of the ship, where she was calibrating atmospheric processors for their next deployment, dropping faster than our most optimistic projections. It's like the organisms are actually eager to clean up the environmental damage. Marcus shook his head in amazement. I still can't believe how quickly they've adapted to our modified atmospheric conditions. They were already adapted. We simply gave them the environmental support they needed to thrive. Thessarian appeared in the observation deck, her massive form moving through the ship's corridors with surprising grace. The vessel had been designed with her physiology in mind, featuring spaces large enough for her to move comfortably alongside areas scaled for the human crew members who typically assisted with her research. Over the past 3 weeks, Marcus had grown accustomed to the way she moved, the subtle shifts in her posture that indicated her mood, the way her golden eyes brightened when she was excited about a new discovery. What he hadn't grown accustomed to was the way his heart still skipped when she looked at him with a warm fondness that had become increasingly common in their interactions. The consortium representatives are arriving tomorrow for the preliminary assessment, Thessarian continued, settling herself beside the observation windows. Are you prepared for their questions about the biological integration protocols? Marcus nodded, though he felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. I've prepared comprehensive documentation of the organism cultivation process and the environmental impact projections, though I suspect they'll be more interested in timeline and cost efficiency than ecological stability. Probably, but they cannot argue with results, and our results speak for themselves. Thessarian's voice carried satisfaction. In 3 weeks, we have accomplished more environmental rehabilitation than their original plan projected for 3 years. The success of their collaboration had exceeded even Marcus's optimistic expectations. By combining his understanding of extremophile organisms with Thessarian's atmospheric engineering expertise, they had developed an approach that not only cleaned up the environmental damage from the mining operations, but actually improved the planet's habitability prospects beyond its original state. More than that, they had proven that the empathetic terraforming principles Thessarian had developed could be applied to damaged worlds, not just pristine ones. The implications for environmental rehabilitation across human space were staggering. Marcus, Thessarian said, her voice taking on a tone he had learned to recognize as indicating something important. There is something we need to discuss before tomorrow's presentation. What is it? The consortium will almost certainly offer to expand this project to other damaged worlds in their territory. The potential applications for our approach are too valuable for them to ignore. Thessarian paused, her golden eyes meeting his. If we accept such an expansion, it would mean extended collaboration, possibly for years. It would also mean making our partnership very public. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The professional implications were enormous. The chance to implement their techniques on multiple worlds to prove the effectiveness of empathetic terraforming on a scale that could influence policy across human space. But the personal implications were equally significant. And you're concerned about how public scrutiny might affect us personally, Marcus said, understanding the subtext of her concern. I am concerned about how it might affect you personally, Thessarian corrected. My position within the Empire provides certain protections. Your situation is more vulnerable. Association with me on such a public scale could complicate your standing within human scientific and political circles. Marcus had been thinking about this possibility himself. A relationship between a human scientist and a dragon advisor was unprecedented enough that it was certain to attract attention from both species media and political establishments. The potential for that attention to become problematic was very real. Have I mentioned that I don't particularly care about my standing within human scientific and political circles? Marcus said with a slight smile, especially when compared to the chance to continue working with you on projects that could actually change how we treat other worlds. You say that now, but the reality of constant scrutiny of having every aspect of our collaboration questioned and analyzed. Thessarian. Marcus interrupted her gently. Are you trying to give me an opportunity to back away from this? From us? The directness of his question seemed to surprise her. Those magnificent golden eyes studied him for a long moment before she answered. I suppose I'm offering you the chance to choose a path that would be easier for you personally. Yes. I've been thinking about what I am asking of you by pursuing this partnership, both professional and personal. The challenges ahead. The challenges ahead will be worth facing for the chance to continue working with you, Marcus said firmly, and for the chance to continue getting to know you outside of work as well. Unless you're having second thoughts about our relationship. No. The speed and certainty of her response made warmth spread through Marcus's chest. No, I'm not having second thoughts. These weeks have been the happiest I can remember in decades. But I needed to ensure that you fully understand what you were choosing. Marcus moved closer to her, still marveling at how natural it felt to be in her presence, despite the vast differences between them. I understand that I'm choosing to work with the most brilliant scientist I've ever met on research that could help preserve countless ecosystems. I understand that I'm choosing to be with someone who makes me feel like the best version of myself. I understand that none of this will be simple or conventional. He paused, looking out at the planet rotating beneath them, then back at Thessarian. But I also understand that 3 weeks ago I was lonely and isolated and starting to doubt whether my work had any real value. Now I wake up every day excited about what we might discover together. That's worth any amount of political complications. Thessarian was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see something that might have been relief in her expression. I feel the same way, she said softly. I had not realized how much I needed someone who could share both the excitement of discovery and the simple pleasure of conversation until I found both with you. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching their planet turn slowly below them. The world that had seemed so barren and hostile when Marcus first arrived now showed patches of green where their biological rehabilitation efforts had taken hold. In some areas, the atmosphere processors worked in harmony with naturally occurring organisms to create small but thriving ecosystems that were already attracting local wildlife. It's beautiful, Marcus said, watching a herd of indigenous creatures move across one of the rehabilitated zones. We actually made it more alive than it was before. We did, Thessarian agreed, and there was deep satisfaction in her voice. And this is only the beginning. If the consortium expands the program, we could bring similar rehabilitation to dozens of worlds. Speaking of the consortium, Marcus said, should we discuss how to present our personal relationship during tomorrow's meetings? I assume they'll have questions about the nature of our collaboration. Undoubtedly. I suggest we focus on the professional aspects during the formal presentations, but we should not attempt to hide our personal connection. Attempting such deception would be both impractical and unnecessary. Thessarian's expression grew thoughtful. Besides, I find I am proud of our relationship, not ashamed of it. I see no reason to pretend otherwise. Marcus felt his heart swell at her words. I'm proud of it too, though I should probably warn you that I tend to get nervous during formal presentations. I might ramble about cellular metabolic pathways when I should be discussing cost projections. I happen to find your enthusiasm for cellular metabolic pathways quite charming, Thessarian said with warm amusement. Though perhaps we should prepare some presentation notes to help keep you focused on the specific points that will interest the consortium. They spent the next several hours preparing for the meetings, reviewing data, and rehearsing key points. As they worked, Marcus found himself marveling again at how seamlessly their minds worked together. Thessarian's broad theoretical frameworks provided context for his detailed biological observations, while his insights into specific organism behaviors helped refine her atmospheric engineering models. More than that, they had developed an easy rhythm of collaboration that felt natural despite the short time they had been working together. They anticipated each other's questions, built on each other's ideas, and created solutions that neither could have developed alone. "Marcus," Thessarian said as they concluded their preparation session, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever have concerns about the physical aspects of our relationship? I know we have not discussed such matters directly, but I am aware that the differences between our species present certain logistical challenges." The question caught Marcus off guard, though he realized it was a natural concern given their situation. "I won't pretend I haven't thought about it," he said honestly, "but I've also learned that there are many ways to express affection and intimacy that don't require direct physical compatibility." Such as, Marcus felt himself flush slightly, but pressed on with characteristic honesty. "Such as the way you listen to me when I get excited about my research. Such as the conversations we have late into the night about everything from terraforming theory to childhood memories. Such as the way you make me feel valued and understood in ways I never have before." He paused, gathering courage. "And such as the way my heart races when you look at me the way you're looking at me right now." Physical intimacy is important, but emotional and intellectual intimacy are what make a relationship meaningful. And we definitely have both of those. Thessarian's golden eyes seemed to glow with warmth. "You continue to surprise me with your wisdom, Marcus. I had similar thoughts, but I was uncertain whether such perspectives would be satisfying for a human in a long-term relationship." "This human finds those perspectives completely satisfying," Marcus said softly, "especially when combined with the fact that you are the most magnificent being I have ever encountered, both intellectually and physically. The way you move, the way your scales catch the light, the way your voice sounds when you're excited about a new discovery. You take my breath away on a regular basis." "As you do mine," Thessarian said, lowering her massive head until she was close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of her breath. "I find myself studying the expressions that cross your face when you are concentrating, appreciating the passion in your voice when you discuss your work, feeling genuine affection for your tendency to push your glasses up when you are nervous." Marcus reached up instinctively to adjust his glasses, then laughed when he realized what he was doing. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I notice everything about you. You have become quite important to me, Dr. Marcus Chun." "You've become quite important to me too, Primary Scientific Advisor Thessarian Veltar Knox." Marcus smiled up at her. "Though I prefer just Thessarian and Marcus." "As do I." The moment stretched between them, comfortable and warm despite the unconventional nature of their connection. Outside the observation windows, their planet continued its slow rotation, showing the growing patches of rehabilitated landscape that represented their successful collaboration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they presented their work to the consortium representatives. If all went well, it would also bring new opportunities to expand their research and prove that empathetic terraforming could revolutionize planetary development across human space. But for now, Marcus was content to simply enjoy the present moment, working alongside someone he respected deeply, building something meaningful together, and discovering that love could indeed transcend the boundaries of species, size, and conventional expectations. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. 6 months later, Marcus stood before the Galactic Terraforming Council on New Geneva, watching the faces of representatives from 12 human colony worlds as he presented the final results of the Kepler 442b rehabilitation project. The massive conference chamber buzzed with conversations in a dozen languages, but Marcus felt calm in a way that would have been impossible before his partnership with Thessarian began. "The biological integration protocols have exceeded all projected outcomes," Marcus reported, manipulating holographic displays that showed lush green landscapes where barren mining sites had existed just months before. "Environmental toxicity levels have dropped by 94%, biodiversity indices have increased by 300%, and Atmospheric stability projections indicate the rehabilitation will be self-sustaining within 2 years. Behind him, Thessarian's massive form dominated the specially constructed platform that allowed her to address the council directly. Her presence had caused considerable controversy when the session was first proposed, but the undeniable success of their collaboration had overcome most political objections. The empathetic terraforming approach has proven effective not only for pristine worlds, but for environmental rehabilitation on an unprecedented scale, Thessarian added, her voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber. The techniques developed on Kepler 442b are already being implemented on 7 additional worlds with similar results. Admiral Sarah Chun, the human representative from the Outer Colonies Consortium, leaned forward in her seat. Dr. Chun, the economic implications of your approach are impressive, but I have concerns about the scalability. Can these techniques be standardized for use by terraforming crews who lack your specific expertise in extremophile organisms? Marcus nodded, having anticipated the question. We've developed comprehensive training protocols and automated monitoring systems that allow standard terraforming teams to implement the biological integration process. The key is understanding that each world requires customized approaches based on its existing ecosystem, but the underlying principles can be taught and applied broadly. In the time investment, asked Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Mars Terraforming Institute. Our preliminary analysis suggests your methods require significantly longer initial assessment periods. The initial assessment does take longer, Marcus admitted, but the overall project timelines are actually shorter because we avoid the ecosystem collapse and reconstruction phases that conventional terraforming requires. More importantly, the end results are far more stable and sustainable. Thessarian stepped forward slightly, her golden eyes scanning the assembly. If I may address the underlying concern, esteemed representatives. The question is not whether we can afford to invest time in understanding planetary ecosystems before we modify them. The question is whether we can afford not to. The economic and environmental costs of terraforming failures far exceed the investment required for proper biological integration. Marcus watched the faces around the chamber, seeing skepticism gradually giving way to genuine interest as the implications of their work became clear. The transformation was gratifying, but what mattered most to him was the quiet pride he could see in Thessarian's expression when she caught his eye. After the formal presentation concluded, they found themselves in a smaller conference room with the core committee responsible for making terraforming policy recommendations. The atmosphere was more relaxed, but Marcus could sense the importance of this final discussion phase. Dr. Chun, Primary Advisor Knox, began Director Elizabeth Ross from the Terraforming Oversight Commission. Your results are impressive, but I need to address the elephant in the room. The political implications of your partnership extend beyond scientific collaboration. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but before he could respond, Thessarian spoke with calm authority. Director Ross, if you're referring to the personal relationship between Dr. Chun and myself, I can assure you that it has enhanced rather than compromised our professional effectiveness. Our collaboration has produced breakthrough research precisely because it is based on mutual respect, genuine intellectual partnership, and shared commitment to sustainable planetary development. That may be true, Director Ross continued, but public perception matters for policy implementation. There are concerns about how colony worlds will react to environmental policies that emerge from what some are calling an unprecedented interspecies romantic relationship. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. Director Ross, with respect, the relationship between Primary Advisor Knox and myself is not what makes our research valid. The data speaks for itself. 7 worlds have been successfully rehabilitated using our techniques. Hundreds of thousands of colonists are living in healthier environments because of our work. That's what should matter for policy consideration. Admiral Chun spoke up from across the table. The young man has a point, Elizabeth. We're here to evaluate scientific methods, not personal relationships. If their techniques work and the economic benefits are as substantial as the data suggests, then that's what we should be focusing on. I agree, said Dr. Tanaka. Besides, if we start making policy decisions based on romantic relationships between researchers, we're going to have a lot of problems. Half the scientific community would be disqualified from consideration. Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as several other committee members nodded in agreement. Director Ross looked around the table, clearly recognizing that her concerns were not widely shared. "Very well," she said finally. "Let's focus on the practical implementation questions. Dr. Chun, if the Council approves the expansion of these techniques to additional worlds, would you and Primary Advisor Knox be available to oversee the initial implementation phases?" Marcus glanced at Thessarian, seeing his own excitement reflected in her golden eyes. "Absolutely," he said. "We've already identified 12 additional worlds where our techniques could be applied immediately, and preliminary surveys suggest at least 30 more potential sites within the next 2 years. And the Dragon Empire is willing to provide continued technical support for these projects?" Admiral Chen asked, directing her question to Thessarian. "The Empire recognizes that environmental stability serves everyone's interests," Thessarian replied. "We are prepared to provide full technical and logistical support for expansion of the empathetic terraforming program. Additionally, we are willing to establish joint research facilities to train human scientists in biological integration techniques." Marcus felt his heart race at the implications. Joint research facilities would mean permanent collaboration between human and dragon scientists, breaking down barriers that had existed for generations. It would mean his relationship with Thessarian would be not just accepted, but celebrated as the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. 2 hours later, they emerged from the committee meeting with preliminary approval for the largest terraforming expansion program in human history. Marcus felt slightly dazed by the scope of what they had just committed to, but also more energized than he had ever been. "I can't believe they approved it," he said as they walked through the corridors of the diplomatic complex toward their quarters. 30 worlds over the next 5 years, joint research facilities, integrated training programs. It's everything we hoped for and more. "It is what we have earned through the quality of our work," Thessarian said with satisfaction. "And it is only the beginning. Once other sectors see the results we achieve, the demand for empathetic terraforming will grow exponentially." They reached Marcus's quarters, which had been specially modified to accommodate both human and dragon physiology for their joint residence. The space was larger than anything Marcus had ever called home, but it felt cozy when shared with Thessarian. "Thessarian," Marcus said as they settled into their usual evening routine, "can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Always." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't decided to visit an isolated human researcher on that mining world 6 months ago? If you had just continued with your regular work, and I had finished my assignment and moved on to another project?" Thessarian considered the question seriously, as she did all of his questions. "I think about it sometimes. I believe I would have continued my research, achieved some successes, but remained fundamentally isolated. The loneliness was becoming problematic for my work effectiveness, and I would have finished documenting my sulfur processing organisms, filed my reports, and moved on to another assignment where I could be alone with my microscopes and my self-doubt," Marcus said thoughtfully. "We both would have continued functioning, but neither of us would have thrived. Instead, we found something neither of us knew we were looking for," Thessarian said softly. "Professional partnership that amplifies both our capabilities and personal connection that makes everything else more meaningful." Marcus moved to the observation window that looked out over New Geneva's carefully maintained parklands. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. 6 months ago, I was a lonely xenobiologist studying bacteria on a remote mining world. Now, I'm part of a partnership that's changing how an entire species approaches planetary development. And you are part of a relationship that has taught a centuries-old dragon that she could still discover new forms of happiness," Thessarian added, joining him at the window. Marcus looked up at her, still feeling that familiar catch in his breath when he saw the way the light played across her scales. "Do you think we can really make it work? Not just a research program, but us. A relationship that everyone says is unprecedented and impossible." "Marcus," Thessarian said, lowering her massive head until their eyes were level, "we have already made it work. We have proven that intellectual partnership, emotional support, and genuine affection can transcend any barrier of species or size. Everything else is simply logistics. When you put it that way, it sounds almost simple. The most profound connections often are simple at their core." Two minds that understand each other, two hearts that choose to care for each other, two spirits that find joy in shared discovery. Thessarian's voice grew warm with affection. The rest is just details. Marcus felt overwhelming gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the chain of circumstances that had brought them together, for Thessarian's courage in approaching him that first day, for his own willingness to be vulnerable with someone so far outside his experience. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying all the wonder and certainty he felt. "And I love you," Thessarian replied, the ancient power in her voice making the declaration feel like something that could reshape reality itself. As they stood together watching the lights of New Geneva sparkle in the distance, Marcus realized that their story was no longer about two isolated individuals finding connection. It had become something larger, proof that understanding and compassion could bridge any gap, that love could indeed transcend the boundaries of species and convention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the complex work of expanding their terraforming program across dozens of worlds. There would be political obstacles, technical difficulties, and probably more questions about their unconventional relationship. But tonight, Marcus was content to stand beside the most magnificent being he had ever known, planning a future that would help preserve and restore life across the galaxy, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as partners in every sense of the word. In a universe where humans were supposed to be the weakest species, Marcus had discovered that their greatest strength was not in their weapons or their technology, but in their infinite capacity for connection. And in learning to love a dragon, he had helped prove that sometimes the most impossible relationships were actually the most inevitable ones. Their story was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning.